The sun had barely risen over the city of Atlanta when 17-year-old Malik Carter left his small apartment, backpack slung over his shoulder. Today was supposed to be just another day at Jefferson High School, but life had other plans. Malik wasn't just any student. He was a straight-A scholar, a math whiz, and an aspiring lawyer. His teachers adored him, his classmates respected him, and his mother, who had raised him alone, proudly called him her future changemaker. But none of that mattered to the officer who pulled up beside him that morning. "Hey, you. Stop right there." Malik froze. He turned slowly to see a uniformed officer stepping out of his patrol car, hand hovering over his holster. "Where are you going?" the officer asked, voice laced with suspicion. "School," Malik replied cautiously, holding up his backpack. "I go to Jefferson High." The officer's eyes narrowed. "You fit the description of a suspect involved in a robbery last night. I need to search your bag." Malik's heart pounded. He had done nothing wrong, but he knew that protesting could make things worse. He slowly handed over his bag, trying to keep his voice steady. "I have nothing to hide, sir." The officer rifled through his belongings: textbooks, notebooks, a graphing calculator. No stolen goods. No weapons. Just a student trying to get to school. But the officer wasn't satisfied. "Turn around," he ordered. "Hands behind your back." Malik's stomach twisted. "Am I being arrested?" "Detained for questioning," the officer said gruffly, snapping cold metal cuffs around Malik's wrists. A few minutes later, Malik sat in the back of the patrol car, humiliated and confused. Students passing by whispered and pointed. His reputation, the one he had worked so hard to build, was crumbling before his eyes. At the station, Malik was placed in a small room, hands still cuffed. His mind raced. What was he supposed to do? Then he remembered something, a book he had read about knowing your rights. He took a deep breath and called out, "I'd like to call my lawyer." The officer scoffed. "You're a kid. You don't have a lawyer." Malik smirked despite himself. "Actually, I do." He gave them the number of Mr. Richards, his school's legal studies teacher. The man had once told Malik, "If you ever need legal help, you call me first." 10 minutes later, Mr. Richards stormed into the station, briefcase in hand. "This boy is a minor, and you detained him without just cause," Mr. Richards said sharply. "Where's the evidence tying him to this so-called robbery?" The officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Well, one muttered, "He looked suspicious." "That's not a crime," Mr. Richards shot back. "Now, either you charge him with something, or you let him go." After a tense silence, the officer sighed. "He's free to go." Malik stood up, rubbing his wrists. Relief flooded him, but so did frustration. He had almost lost everything, not because he did anything wrong, but because of a system that saw him as guilty before proven innocent. That night, Malik made a decision. He wouldn't just dream of becoming a lawyer. He would fight for justice so that no other black boy would have to endure what he did. Because real change, he realized, starts with those who refuse to accept injustice as normal. And Malik Carter was ready to fight. Malik didn't know that his battle had only just begun. The next morning, he walked into school, head held high, but the whispers had already spread. "That's the kid who got arrested." He was probably guilty. Even some teachers looked at him differently. Then his phone buzzed. An unknown number. "Malik Carter?" a deep voice asked. "Yes. This is Detective Harris. We need you to come down to the station. It's urgent." His blood ran cold. "Why?" "We have new evidence. The real suspect was caught on camera last night. Turns out he looks nothing like you." Malik's stomach twisted. They had detained him, humiliated him, and now they realized they had the wrong person all along? But then came the real shocker. One of the officers involved in your detainment altered records to justify your arrest. You might want to get your lawyer. Malik's fist clenched. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about an entire system that could destroy a young man's future with a single assumption. And he wasn't about to let it slide. He called Mr. Richards. "We're taking them to court," his teacher-turned-lawyer said firmly. "You ready for this?" Malik took a deep breath. More than ever, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, activists, even classmates who once whispered about him were now watching in silence. Malik sat beside Mr. Richards, heart hammering. The officer who had arrested him sat across the room, shifting uncomfortably. The prosecution laid out the facts, how the officer had lied, how Malik had been falsely detained, and how it could have destroyed his life. Then Malik was called to the stand. He swallowed hard, gripping the edges of the podium. "I could have been another statistic," he said, voice steady. "But I'm standing here because I refuse to be silenced. This isn't just about me. It's about justice for every young person who's been seen as guilty just because of their skin." A murmur swept through the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel. The officer's face paled as the jury delivered the verdict, guilty of misconduct. He was stripped of his badge. As Malik stepped outside, cameras flashed. Microphones shoved toward him. "What's next for you?" a reporter asked. Malik glanced at Mr. Richards, then at his mother, who stood in the crowd, tears in her eyes. "I'm going to be a lawyer," he said. "And I'm going to change the system, because justice wasn't just a dream anymore. It was his mission." The weeks following the trial were a whirlwind. Malik's name was everywhere. News headlines, social media, even national television. Some called him a hero. Others saw him as a troublemaker. But Malik didn't care about opinions. He cared about action. With Mr. Richards' help, he began speaking at schools and community centers, educating students about their rights when dealing with law enforcement. He shared his story not for sympathy, but to empower. "Knowledge is power," he would say, "and if I had hesitated, if I didn't know my rights, I might not be standing here today." But Malik also learned that change didn't come easy. Hate mail slipped into his school locker. A police car often idled suspiciously near his apartment. Some teachers subtly distanced themselves from him, wary of the attention he brought. Even his best friend, Trey, admitted, "Man, I respect what you're doing, but you're making a lot of enemies." One evening, as Malik walked home from a community event, his phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A low voice murmured, "You're making the wrong kind of noise, kid. Drop this lawyer dream before it drops you." Malik stopped mid-step, his heart racing. Who is this? The line went dead. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Was he really in danger? Should he back off? His mother noticed his unease but said nothing until she found him pacing at 3 a.m. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You can't change the world if you're too afraid to face it, baby." Her words stayed with him. The next morning, he walked into school, shoulders squared, chin high. He wasn't backing down. If anything, the threats only proved that the system feared people like him, people who refused to be silent. 1 month later, Malik found himself on a stage, invited to speak at a national youth conference on social justice. The crowd was massive, the lights blinding. But he stood firm, gripping the microphone, and began. "I was 17 when I learned that doing everything right still wasn't enough to protect me from injustice. I was just a kid trying to get to school when I was thrown into a system that could have destroyed my future before it even began." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. But I fought back. Not with anger, not with violence, but with knowledge, with law, with truth. And I learned that change doesn't start in the courtroom. It starts here. He gestured to the crowd. With us. Thunderous applause erupted. Cameras flashed. His mother sat in the front row, tears in her eyes. When the conference ended, a man in a sharp suit approached him, handing him a business card. "I'm from the Harvard Law Outreach Program. We've been following your case. If you're serious about becoming a lawyer, we'd like to help." Malik stared at the cards, speechless. Harvard. He looked up, his mind flashing back to the day he sat in the back of that police car, hands cuffed, thinking his future was over. Now, the world was opening up in ways he never imagined. He shook the man's hand, a determined fire in his eyes. "I'm more than serious, because this was just the beginning." The weeks passed, and Malik threw himself into his studies harder than ever. But alongside academics, he was building something greater, a movement. With the help of Mr. Richards and a few passionate students, he launched a legal awareness club at Jefferson High, offering workshops on rights, advocacy, and systemic reform. Then came the biggest challenge yet. One afternoon, Mr. Richards called him into his office, his expression serious. "Malik, the officer who arrested you, he's not the only one. We've uncovered a pattern, dozens of wrongful detentions over the past 5 years. And I think you're the one who can expose it." Malik's breath caught. "How?" There's going to be a lawsuit, a class action case against the department. We need someone to testify to put a face to the victims. Malik knew what this meant. More enemies, more threats, more pressure. But he also knew something bigger. If he didn't stand up, who would? He met Mr. Richards' gaze and nodded. I'm in. The courtroom was packed once again, but this time Malik wasn't the only one fighting. Other young men, students, workers, fathers, stood with him, ready to reveal their own injustices. As he took the stand, he felt the weight of history on his shoulders, but he also felt something stronger. Purpose. He spoke not just for himself, but for all those who had been silenced. And when the verdict came, when the court ruled in favor of reform, forcing policy changes and dismissals within the department, Malik knew this fight had been worth it. Walking out of the courthouse, he was swarmed by reporters. One asked, "Malik, what's next?" He smiled, glancing at his mother and Mr. Richards beside him. Then he looked straight into the cameras. Law school. And after that, changing the world. Malik's journey didn't stop there. As the months passed, the media frenzy around his case slowly died down, but the fire inside him burned brighter than ever. He became a symbol of resistance, a young man unafraid to confront a broken system. But there was more work to do, and he knew it. By the time he'd received his acceptance letter to Harvard Law, Malik had already made a name for himself as a powerful advocate for justice. He'd led more rallies, more community meetings, and more marches than he could count. He had become the voice for those who didn't have one, and though his life had been turned upside down, he found strength in the struggle. The pressure never really let up. His inbox was filled with requests from activists, journalists, and even other law enforcement officers wanting to share their stories. But Malik stayed focused. He wasn't just chasing headlines or praise. He was chasing real change. It was one late night, with his textbooks scattered around him, when he realized the full scope of what he'd started. The phone call came in the middle of his study session, a voice he hadn't heard in a while. It was Trey. "I'm proud of you, man," Trey said, his voice full of emotion. "You've changed the game. You've changed us all." Malik smiled, looking out at the city lights beyond his window. "We're just getting started."